Our second speaker, Jack O'Connell, we have Tim Gallagher, who I think often introduces himself as a recovering print journalist, now working in public relations and marketing, proud parent of a CLU undergraduate student, a good friend to CERF, a good friend to the School of Business, a good friend to CLU. Tim Gallagher.
Thank you, John. To get a nice introduction from Chuck without any smart aleck comments, it's a rare day. So thank you. Thank you, Dr. Maxey. I appreciate that. You know, if we, oh, Jack, I'm sorry, I blew this here. That's his first slide. I'm going to do Jack's. We'll leave it up there for you if that's okay. I don't know how to get it back. Do you know how to get it back, Dan? Please. Give me just a minute. Oh, you are good, Hamilton. You guys got a PhD in everything. You know, if we elected political leaders on the basis of how good they were and how effective they were, and not on the basis of how much money they have or how much name recognition they have, we'd be calling the next speaker Governor O'Connell today. Jack has built a tremendous career, but without the cachet of a Jerry Brown or the name of money of a Meg Whitman. So instead, what we have is a retired public servant driving a Prius about to get an honorary doctorate as our speaker today. God, I did it again, Dan. Wait a minute. All right. Shush now. That's not very nice at all, is it? It's blank. Cover me, Dan. God bless you. I'm standing over here right now. Thank you. That's good, Chris. Sister Mary Elizabeth used to say that too. Stands at your side. When you were in journalism, there's a phrase about no cheering in the press box. That meant you translate that as you were supposed to be objective. You were not supposed to take a side for any sports team or any politician. There were 2 times in my career where I absolutely forgot all about that because the person in public office was so good, and my idea of a public servant that we abandoned all objectivity, at least I did, and one of those was in the case of Jack O'Connell. Because of his public service to the state, there are hundreds of thousands of children in classrooms today that are a lot smaller than it used to be, getting a lot more attention from their teachers. Because of Jack O'Connell, there are a lot of public school teachers in this state getting better pay. Not all that they should, but getting better pay because of the work Jack did in the legislature. And because of Jack O'Connell, there are billions of dollars being spent in public school construction in the state of California because he got us to pass Prop 39, which lowered the threshold from a 2/3 majority for a public school bond down to 55%, something a little more palatable. And because of that, more public school facilities are being built. He is a definition of a true public servant, and we are fortunate to have him as our speaker today. Please help me in joining our retired Superintendent of Public Instruction, Jack O'Connell.
Very generous. Thank you. Thank you. Value our friendship, man. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Stay away from me.
When I need to pull the slides up, I'm going to call you. That's Dr. Kimball said, just keep your hands to your sides. See, if I was here, he would say, keep your hands out of my pockets. That's what for years and years. But it's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you for the hospitality, President Kimball, and Cal Lutheran that contributes so much in so many ways, academically, educationally, yes, economically, even Bill would agree, I'm certain, and recreationally for so many of us over the years. And for me to be a recipient of an honorary doctorate degree where the Dallas Cowboys practice, even my mother said last night, I finally have a doctor in the family. I said, not yet, but she said, well, you'll finally make something of yourself. So I don't think she fully grasped the concept, but it was great. So thank you for that. And to the board for inviting me here today, letting you know what I've done for you in public education over the years. Honored to be here. I wanted to start out with a story. Tim and I were talking last night, and he said, why don't you tell one of your all-time favorite stories? And so I think I will. It's very true. I'm going to talk for a minute or two on career partnership. And your board here understands the importance and the nexus between economic development, everything that Bill talked about, and having that well-skilled, well-educated workforce. And that well-skilled, well-educated workforce is going to come from our school system here. It's going to come from the K through 12. It's going to come from Cal Lutheran. It's going to come from Cal State University Channel Islands and UC Santa Barbara and Northridge for our area. But the story I wanted to tell was there's a career technical education academy in Sacramento, probably the closest school to the Capitol. It's about 2 miles away. And it's an emphasis on what Bill had talked about, the development area, medical. 500, small school, 500 kids. And it's every student there, sophomores through senior, has to say that they're, before they enroll, interested in the healthcare profession. So they were going to have their first day at school, and they wanted me to go and cut the ribbon as state superintendent right down the street. So I got to the school early, and I'd been out there during the construction and very familiar with the curriculum and things, and public school. And the first kid I met said he's going to be a doctor. Second kid said he wanted to be a nurse. Third kid said dentist. So I got up, I gave my pitch, and they had all the TV cameras and everything, and there was no car chase that was going to start, so all the cameras stayed while I was there. And so I gave my pitch, cut the ribbon, and then started to walk to my Prius to get in the car. And as I jumped in the car, some kid practically jumped in the back seat right behind me. And I looked at this kid and I said, "Kid, what is it?" He says, "Well, Mr. O'Connell, I wanted to meet you." I said, "Well, how come?" He says, "Well, you and I have a lot in common." I said, "Oh, why is that?" He said, "Well, your speech just put everybody to sleep, and I want to be an anesthesiologist." So it was so there's I can tell that it was a tough crowd, Bill. It was a very tough crowd. And then my other favorite story is most summers, I didn't do it last summer, but most summers I taught a class under the radar. We never did a press release or anything. And summer before last, I did it in a small district in Southern California. I'll think of it in a second. It was a night. Oh, Los Angeles Unified School District. And I did it, I think, Monday nights, and it was citizenship. So a very true story. I used to write a few questions on the board to kind of get the students engaged. So this is going to be my version of audience participation. Are you ready? Question went like this. What do you call an elected official who's in office running for re-election? And to give the students a hint, I said the first 2 letters are I-N. So, of course, the word I wanted is? Incompetent. This student spelled the word perfectly, incompetent. So I marked it right. I mean, I know there's no budget and anything. I wasn't getting paid, so I figured we ought to do that. I wanted to start out with a quote as a history major from President Roosevelt. And it's a quote a long time ago that goes like this. "We cannot always build the future for our youth, but we can build our youth for the future." A quote delivered nearly 75 years ago, and is true as much today, if not more so, than it was when it was delivered in Washington, D.C. We have an obligation, I believe, to prepare our students not just for the jobs on the couple of 3-4 years that Bill talked about, but I really believe our educational delivery system has an obligation to prepare our students for the next decade and the decade after as well. So I think our task is relatively simple. Here's our simple task. We need to prepare our students for jobs that yet even exist, and make sure that we're preparing our students to solve solutions to problems that are as of yet even identified. Now, it's no newsflash to the educational community here today, business leaders, community leaders, that the state, as you saw earlier, has a major budget crisis. And no matter how bad I could tell you from a legislative perspective for 20 years or as state superintendent as the budget relates to education, no matter how bad I tell you it is, quite frankly, it's even worse. And you saw how difficult it's going to be to address. And my simple economic rationale is it's for cyclical reasons, it's for some bad decisions that have been made in Sacramento, admittedly, and also some structural problems. I'll tell you one kind of quick funny story. Well, you'll decide if it's funny. One quick story. I was complaining to my office a couple years ago, well, last year at the state. I said, you know, I notice I'm never on national news. I have relatives on the East Coast. I'm only going to be the state superintendent for another year, so see if you can get me on. Honestly, that next day, I got home, my house, Sacramento, about 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, and my office called. They said, we just received a call from CNN in a panic. They're going to do a feature on CNN tomorrow morning, and whoever was supposed to represent them, they didn't know if it was a governor or whomever, just bailed. And how would you like to be on CNN to talk about education and the state budget of California? This is a very true story about 6-8 months ago. And so I said, yeah, great. Let me call a couple of my relatives on the East Coast. I said, what time is it on? They said 7 o'clock, 7 in the morning. So, well, you know, no problem. I can make it in the studio downtown Sacramento by 7. Well, it was 7 in the morning, East Coast time. That means 4 o'clock. They wanted me there an hour early. That means 3 o'clock, right? It was a half-hour drive from my place up there. You do the math, so that means getting up at 2. I mean, I'm normally just getting in. And so the first question that the guy asked, John Roberts, it was, Mr. O'Connell, State Superintendent, if there's one word to describe the budget situation in California as it relates to education, what is that one word? Now, this is, for me, at 4 in the morning, been up for a couple hours, slept for about a half hour. So I thought for a second, and I said, well, Mr. Roberts, may I use a 4-letter word? So I'm sure they're reaching for the mute button in Atlanta. I said, the word is ugly. And no matter how bad the state budget is, no matter what I tell you, it really is an ugly budget. But before I kind of finish in a few minutes on budget, I want you to enjoy the event and leave you with somewhat of an optimistic tone, if I can. So I want to give you some good news on public education, some good news. And Ventura County really reflects the state, and I brought some of the, just about the 6 or 7 state slides. Tim's already shown you half of them on here. But if you leave with just one memory from my 20-minute pitch here, I want you to know this. For the last 8 years in the state of California, our test scores are up almost every grade level, every subject area for the last 8 years. Now, you're probably thinking out there, well, 8 years, that's about how long our state assessment instruments have been aligned to our state standards. And while you'd be right, that's not why I say 8 years test scores are up. I have been state superintendent for 8 years. And so I take full credit for those test scores being up. But the snapshot picture of our schools, we have just under 6.3 million students, and we're actually slightly declining for about the 5th year in a row. Little hidden secret, and please don't say that in LA when they're constantly trying to pass school bonds, and they are actually leading the way on the decline of enrollment. We have 1,000 school districts. We have almost 10,000 schools and a little over 5,000 school board members. We clearly have the most diverse student population in the country, the most mobile student population, the most challenging student population, and we really have, in my opinion, the student population with the greatest potential on the planet. And if we are smart economically, we can take advantage of that potential that we have here. You know, every state has a state superintendent. We were in another state, I think we were in Arizona about 2 years ago, before Arizona had issues, so you could go there on this. And we were around, it was a room not quite this large, and 50 people at a table. And I was listening carefully to the bill. My colleague and a friend from North Dakota, when he was bragging about they had a surplus in oil in the schools, he said they put up the test scores for the nationally normed tests, and it compares all 50 states how well we do. Well, California is about the top of the bottom third when you look at our, it's called the NAEP, the nationally normed test scores, about the top of the bottom third. So my friend from North Dakota said, hey, Mr. State Superintendent from California, O'Connell, I'm going to razz you a little bit because California tends to drive education reform. And what happens here in California ripples through the rest of the state. The textbooks, you really just have one set of textbooks, and we, for the most part, drive those textbooks. So when people say, is it true we're going to be teaching algebra in 8th grade shortly, all the rest of the states, I used to handle those conversations and say to my colleague, yes, that's true. So my friend from North Dakota says at this meeting, O'Connell, I hear that California, who's in that bottom third, you have a somewhat, quote, diverse student population. Can you perhaps give me that snapshot? And I said, I think I can give you the student demographics. We're over 50% today are Latino. We are 31% white, 8% Asian American, 8% African American. But I tell them, here's where it gets interesting. Over half the kids that came to school today qualify for free and reduced lunch. 40% of our kids, of that almost 6.3 million, go home from school and speak a language other than English. 39% of our kindergarten kids came to school today to learn the English language. 1 out of 4 kids, K through 12, came to school today to learn the English language. 11% of our kids are designated special education, and we test them all. And over 100 different languages spoken in many of our school districts. The entire tenor of the conversation in that room changed. And it wasn't, why is California in the bottom third? It's how do you do as well as you do, given the student demographics and the challenges that we have. So with that said, now I might need your help here, Tim. Not. Let me give you, and I didn't bring quite as many slides as Bill. I think I'll have about 71 fewer. But I brought a couple of the key ones on test scores. This is, as I mentioned, for 8 years in a row, you've seen test scores go up. This is for English language arts. This is testing kids in grades 2 through 11 in our public school system. And you can see clearly we're moving in the right direction. This reflects a 17% increase in students scoring proficient or advanced. And I use the analogy that's like getting grades A, B in school. We're clearly seeing our students, our teachers, but sure, part of it's greater familiarity with the tests, but it's also a lot of hard work. This is for ELA, English Language Arts. The next chart will be in math, and it really does tell a similar story. Not quite as high as we'd like to be, but again, clearly moving in the right direction to see a nice 13 percentage point gain. The other side of the equation is we need to make sure that we're helping not just the GATE kids and the AP kids and the kids that we know are going to college, but we need to help the kids that are far below basic and below basic, in my opinion. And we've had success working with these more challenging students as well. We have today 600,000 fewer students, which is good, 600,000 fewer students that we categorize as in far below basic or below basic in English language arts, and that's very healthy for us. And it's a similar story for math. It's about 400,000 fewer students that we now can label as far below basic or below basic. Now, a major issue for me, I'm going to take a minute to talk about this, is the achievement gap. So let me try to define the achievement gap so we all are talking about the same parameters. The achievement gap, when you look and extrapolate the data, is real. And I'm one that likes to make decisions and base policy on data, on research, on numbers, not theory, not intuition, not a hunch. And when we really peel away the onions, so to speak, and look at the data and the research, it's clear in California we have an achievement gap. And the achievement gap, primarily when you look at students based upon ethnicity, based upon English language learners, based upon low socioeconomic status, and our special ed kids. And the subgroups growing the fastest are primarily those 4 areas. So for California to have that well-educated, well-skilled workforce, I really do believe we have to ask ourselves, why haven't we been successful in reaching many of these students? We've begun to see a little bit of improvement. This top chart shows us for English language arts as it relates to African American students. You can see about 8 years ago, a 31% disparity between the white and African American kids. We're not narrowing the gap as much as I would like. Despite some very good efforts, we've only been successful at narrowing it a percent. The bottom score for African American students, you can see it's a similar result when it comes to math. The next chart will be our Hispanic students. A little bit more success, but again, it shows the trajectory on the right track, but now we need to accelerate that track, and a faster track. So again, you can see we are really just beginning incrementally to narrow that gap. But I don't believe that California economically can afford to eliminate this gap over the next 30 years. We're on the right track. We have to get on the fast track in order to be able to narrow the achievement gap so that we have that well-educated workforce so that we can have business expansion, business development, and that our education community can again be that magnet for businesses that want to locate here, that want to be here. To me, it's not just a moral imperative nor a social imperative to close the achievement gap. Today, it really is an economic imperative that we have that well-skilled workforce, and that workforce is going to come from our being able to close that gap. You know, it's a new economy. I don't have to tell you, and you heard it eloquently from Bill. It's a new economy that requires higher-level critical thinking skills, analytical skills, problem-solving skills. We all have to be better communicators, and we all need to be technologically proficient as well. So narrowing these gaps has to be a key priority for all of us. We need to invest in capital, and to me, the most important capital is education, and we need to make sure that we're narrowing this gap. A recent study estimated the cost for lost U.S. economic output due to the achievement gap in our nation at a staggering $2.5 trillion between the years 1990 and 2002. And another report that I read about 6 months ago said if we could eliminate the achievement gap in every state budget would be balanced. And here was the big kicker. Even the United States, the federal budget, would be balanced if we could eliminate the achievement gap in our country. And then the researchers went on to say if we could eliminate the gap within the next 12 years, you'd add $980 billion in annual gross domestic product annually. So President Bush had it right when he said we absolutely cannot afford to leave any student behind. Another aspect of holding our schools accountable is at the individual school sites. And we have asked each school, please hit a growth target of what we call 800 on the scale of 200 to 1,000. This is our academic performance index. And if your kids were averaging a B, you would get at 800. Another indicator of positive growth over the last decade in California public education, when we initiated this process, you can see we had 20% of our schools a decade ago hit the growth target of 800. Today, we're just under 50% of our schools hit the growth target of 800. And we have more elementary schools than middle schools and more middle schools than high schools. We need to do a better job with our high schools. And I think that's the last slide that I brought. I can give you another example of our schools in the right direction, and that would be the high school exit exam that's been in place now for about 5 years. This was a law that was very well written by my mother's favorite state senator. Don't tell my kid that I wrote the high school exit exam. When she found out that I wrote the high school exit exam, she wanted to change her last name. I said to her, what do you want to change your last name to? She said Schwarzenegger. That would be much better. The first year that we had the high school exit exam in place, first-time test takers, 64% were successful. 5 years later, which would be last year, 69%. And this is as sophomores. You take the exit exam once as a sophomore. If you pass it 2 sections, you're done. And it's as a condition of receipt of that high school diploma. I'm a big believer in accountability, and it really has led to significant reform in public education at the high school level. Long overdue, long overdue. 95% of our students for the last June graduating class successfully passed the high school exit exam. I'm one that believes, and the high school exit exam, as envisioned by me when I wrote the law 12 years ago, was always to measure the minimum skill set students would need to be successful in this economy. I actually think we need to raise the standards. We shouldn't just be testing kids now for 10th grade concepts. I think we need to elevate those as well. But overall, I'm pleased with the number of students that even continue to come back to school to pass the high school exit exam when their graduating class walks, and if you haven't passed it, you may not be walking across the stage with them. I'm also pleased, talking about achievement gap, with a nice increase in numbers of students passing the high school exit exam who are African American and Latino students. And I'm also pleased, and you might have seen this study in our favorite newspaper, Tim, just this week that I saw a couple days ago, the number of Latino kids and African American kids taking advanced placement classes. And that too will help us address the achievement gap in California. Let's see what else we want. So our schools have really made a lot of changes. We have seen quite a few changes for public education, which normally moves at glacial speed during the last 15 years. It really began with Governor Wilson when we adopted world-class content standards. That means we were telling our teachers what it is we want the students to know and to understand and comprehend. Not how to teach it, but these are the standards. Then we put in place our accountability system, so we know how our schools are performing. And now the next logical step is, and this is controversial, but we should hold our teachers to some extent accountable for the performance of their kids. We now have kids with numbers, a student identifier, so we can actually track how well our students are doing while they're with those teachers. It shouldn't be 100%, and I don't know what the percent should be, but we should have, in my opinion, a little bit, some accountability for those teachers in that area. We also now have our assessment instruments fully aligned to those standards. And then we've really changed the culture. And the culture has been one in education of holding all of our students accountable. When I talked about the NAEP test, I was teased a little bit in Arizona with my colleagues a couple of years ago, the dirty little secret in education. Some states, when they're giving this NAEP exam for NAEP purposes, they exclude their special ed kids. They exclude kids here learning the English language. In California, we don't. While I was state superintendent, we tested every kid. And then we use that, so we're not excluding kids. I'm very disappointed that the legislature and the governor 2 years ago exempted special ed kids from the high school exit exam. Huge mistake in my opinion. Those kids are not going to get the extra help that they need, and we just devalued their diploma, and the business community knows that. Some of the most heated discussions I've had, parents of special ed kids who believe, as I do, their students pass the high school exit. Over half of the special ed kids have successfully passed the high school exit exam. And to exclude prospectively special ed kids from our accountability system, I think is a huge mistake. Let me dispel a myth that far too often people talk about when they talk about career technical education. I'm a big believer in career technical education. Governor Schwarzenegger was a big believer in career tech. And the myth is this. The myth is you're either going to prepare for a career or you're going to prepare for college, an entrance into an outstanding university such as a Cal Lutheran. It's not either or. The two are not mutually exclusive. My goodness, have you read a manual lately to repair an automobile or to even in construction or some of the other high-tech equipment that's used on what we oftentimes refer to as blue-collar jobs? We need even more academic rigor in our career tech classes, and we need to make sure that our colleges and universities update these classes so that they can then accept them at the university level. One of my stories about 4 years ago, Kearney High School in San Diego may have the best career tech program that I've seen. And so I went down to highlight it. I think it was a week or two before my last election, and somehow the media was there, about 6 cameras, and I think somehow we tipped them off that I was going to be there. And so I'm standing there with like half a dozen San Diego TV cameras and walk into this career tech, and they're talking a little bit about math concepts to these folks. And the teacher says to me, he says, oh, here's our state superintendent. Would you like to teach this class? It's a class about algebra and geometry. And this is in a tech class. And so I'm thinking, for all these cameras, I can't say no. Why can't you just ask me to spell potato? I can do that. So I'm trying to remember the last time I had an algebra class and how to spell that. And so the lesson was we walked outside and they measured me, and a little over 6 foot, and then they measured my shadow. And then there was this flagpole at the school that was super high up into the clouds. And so the issue was, how can you find out how tall this flagpole is? Well, they then measured the shadow of the flagpole. We went back inside the classroom, and they could put together how tall this flagpole was. So that's a practical, realistic application in the career tech class, learning both algebraic equations and geometry concepts as well. I'll always remember I did a favor, a friend of mine in the Bay Area. He said, I want to have a town hall meeting, O'Connell, will you come? And I talked about the importance that all students should understand basic algebra and math. So and the question is, one lady came up and she says, Mr. O'Connell, all my son wants to be is a carpenter. Why does he have to know algebra? Why does he have to know math? Why does he have to know geometry? So I just told this lady, let me know what house your kid builds to make sure I never buy it. It's one of, but I'm really very proud, and something we've never done a press release on, but 8 years ago, in the entire state, there were 288, I want you to remember that number, 288 career tech classes that were accepted by our colleges and universities. And as of December 31st, we broke the 8,000 mark. And we did it not by lowering standards. We did it by injecting more rigor and more relevance in those classes. I'm a big believer in the career partnership academies, and I was kidding around earlier about the medical focus in Sacramento. But we did have about 250 career partnership academies 4 years ago. Even in this impossible budget, and Governor Schwarzenegger was great coming up with the money for us, we've doubled it. We have almost 500 career partnership academies, and I've been to several of them, much like the medical. We have them for construction, like at Kearney High School. We have them for high-tech, biotech, nanotech, and they really work well. These types of partnerships like Cal Lutheran, I know, engages in with the community here. Channel Islands has, Cal State Channel Islands, a great great with the medical profession. They have 5 hospitals, I know, where the hospital personnel, they don't just write the checks for the nursing program, they actually help provide some of the teachers, and then they do internships in the hospitals. And it's those kinds of partnerships that we really need to focus on, particularly after Bill's comments with the medical. So I'm really very appreciative of the hard work of our professional educators. I always get a question on parents. What role can parents play? They play a giant role. Parents are still our most important teachers. They're our first teachers. And I've seen some very good programs throughout the state where computers go home with the kids, not textbooks, computers. And everything's done online. You can access all the material. And then each teacher has his or her own web page. And this is coming. This is here today. You're going to have every school, I predict, the next couple of years. Every teacher have his or her own web page. You'll be able to see if your kid attendance was even in school that day. You'll be able to see how well your kid did on test scores. You'll be able to get the homework assignment. You'll know the concepts and the goals and objectives for that day. You'll know when the back to school night is. And so we need to make sure that the home front becomes an extension of that school front. But we also know that much more needs to be done for public education, and many challenges are ahead of us. But we are moving in the right direction. Let me close now with the not so good news, and that would be on the budget and the impacts that public education has had to really endure the last several years. Our schools today are operating on $18 billion less than we had anticipated 3 years ago. $18 billion less from 3 years. The general fund budget in the state of California 3 years ago was a little over $100 million. Today, the general fund budget is in the mid-80s. And Prop 98, which is a minimum guarantee for K through 14, basically says the schools will get 40% of that general fund budget. Adjusted for inflation, our schools today are getting $1,800 less per kid than just 3 years ago. You can do the math. That's about $54,000 less per classroom in our schools. Our class sizes in California are the highest. Despite our efforts at trying with Governor Wilson and my legislation, they've blown the cap. We're the highest class size averages of all 50 states. We have fewer librarians per student than any other state. We have fewer counselors than students on a per capita basis, per ratio basis, than any other state. And some people say, well, it's because we have too many administrators. We're 47th when you look at the ratio of students to administrators. So it's real simple. In California today, we have fewer nurses, fewer librarians, fewer counselors. We have fewer teachers than we have before. Also, we have fewer classes being offered in the arts, in music, and I think that's just criminal. I don't consider sports programs, the music, the band, to be extracurricular. To me, that's a basic core function of public education. And a good music teacher can teach mathematical concepts for students learning the measurements to count. Summer school's practically extinct. Bus rides are longer, and there's one school district here in Ventura County that's a rural district that eliminated bus service altogether. The school year, most school districts, shortened, not lengthened. When other countries, other states are trying to lengthen, the parochial schools here in California lengthening the school year as they should. And I'm going to predict today, and this is going to be somewhat counterintuitive, and I think you're going to be surprised. I'm going to predict, despite what this week, big news out of LA, over 4,000 layoff notices to teachers, 7,000 personnel. I'm going to predict we're going to see within the next decade a shortage of teachers in the state of California. And that's why it's great when folks like Cal Lutheran step up to the plate with your new dean, who's doing a fantastic job here in a relatively short period of time, helping us better prepare our teachers. And I come to that conclusion for 3 reasons. One is we have an aging education workforce. It's projected that 1/3 of our teachers are going to retire in the next 10 years. Number 2 is it's a pipeline issue. We have looked at the enrollments at UC, other independent colleges, and CSU, and it's a precipitous drop of enrollees in our teacher preparation classes. And then number 3, we're projecting an increase in student enrollment over the next decade in California public schools. I'm not sure where they're coming from, Bill, but the Department of Finance says they're coming. So you might have heard that Governor Brown has talked about returning more decision-making, more local control to local entities. That includes public education. But since 1978, there's the old saying in Sacramento, he who pays a piper picks the tune. And since the property tax initiative here in 78, the funding authority has almost exclusively been shifted to Sacramento. And now there's talk about trying to change that paradigm. The budget that the governor put forth last month contains almost the same amount of money, it's not adjusted for inflation at all, for K through 12 education as in the past. So the initiative that I think will be on the ballot in June that will just continue the tax rates will be necessary, or public education will be looking at an additional $2 to $3 billion reduction. I think further cuts to education would be devastating. I don't see a way you can balance this budget without significantly adversely impacting our schools. But it's going to be tough when you have a budget deficit of $25 billion projected over 18 months and a general fund budget today of about $85 billion. You can do the math. Bill alluded to it just kind of quickly. The budget proposal is about half continuing our tax structure and half on cuts, and then very little bit on internal borrowing. In the past, the last 2 years, what really helped us in California was the economic federal stimulus from President Obama and Congress. In fact, my office wrote that grant, and we received as much money as we were eligible for. It was a 2-year stimulus. We front-loaded and put as much money out there as we could 2 years ago. We got a little bit last year. We're not expecting any this year. We also got a little bit of money last year from President Obama. California received about $1 billion to rehire some of the teachers that received layoff notices. But for a host of reasons, we don't anticipate, when the Bill's chart showed this, we don't anticipate more federal assistance. Clearly, our communities need to get more involved. We need to have the support of the business community. And it's not just financial. Business community needs to let local school districts know what skills you need, what aptitudes are lacking from our students. Tell us the skill set. Tell us the skill set that you want our folks to teach. We can do it. We have so many examples of great partnerships here at Cal Lutheran, at Cal State Trail Islands, the hospitals I mentioned, and I do believe that we can still continue to move forward. We need more high-quality instruction, not less. We need to attract the best and the best to this important profession that we call teaching. The competition for our jobs, our industries, as you know, it's not just coming from other states. I used to give the speech 3 or 4 years ago, raiding parties in California every day, from Texas, from Arizona, from the Research Triangle. That's all true. But the additional raiding parties today are coming from emerging, developing third world countries that wish to remain so no longer. And the reality is, these countries can produce goods at a much reduced cost than we can here in California for a host of reasons. Some of them were illuminated earlier. But we have to provide better goods, better services, and again, make sure we have that skilled workforce to help us in the future. The entire community must step up to the plate so that our schools just don't survive. We really do want our schools to be able to thrive. And it takes more than teachers, principals, administrators, and great college presidents. It really does take that entire community to step up to the plate and make that investment. I'm absolutely convinced if we continue to work hard, we continue to work smart, and if we continue to work together, the best is yet to come for education in California. Then and only then, the best is yet to come for our great state. And that's when we can meet the challenge that President Roosevelt put before us to prepare all of our students for their future, which then becomes our future. Thank you very much for having me here today. Sure. Happy to do on time. Yeah, a few minutes for questions. Chuck, I'm happy to stick around. Nancy?
Can you comment on the role unions play in our education system?
We're out of time. Yeah.
I'd like you to comment on the role unions play in our public education system.
Clearly major players in Sacramento, and there are many unions, teachers, and even within the teachers, you have California Teachers Association, American Federation of Teachers, the classified personnel are well represented by multiple, the administrators have their bargaining agents as well, and that's the law. Oftentimes I find some of the union leadership out of touch with the membership. And so we have to constantly work on, as people who want reform and you're not satisfied and happy with the status quo, have the membership work with their own leadership, which is an internal battle for them that I'm not afraid of getting involved in or haven't been in the past. But there are times when the unions have stepped up to the plate and been very helpful on a lot of key issues for us as well. So are they an impediment to reform at times? And there have been other times when there are bad initiatives on the ballot, they step up to the plate and really help us. Henry, back there?
Okay. So we had a big blow up here a week ago where one of our big companies, the parent of Carl's Jr., wanted to move to Texas and was talking about it, and it sort of went away. But how do you evaluate California's public education system like a potential rival state for business like Texas or Florida, other states, other big states?
I envision a day when the most important resource we have is our intellectual capacity, where as a result of having that well-skilled, well-educated, analytical workforce becomes a magnet for businesses that want to come here. And our job in education is really pretty simple. Here's all we have to do. Short circuit, create that learning environment so each student can learn to his or her full maximum potential. Of course, how you get there is the details. But we need to do a much better job. Education has not been a priority in Sacramento the last several years. And yet I've had access to polling, private and public. I have never, in my 28 years in Sacramento, seen education rank lower than second. After 9/11, it was national, and it should be. I've seen it, the economy, number one. I've never seen education rank below. The public wants to invest in education. The record number of school bonds that pass. During this deep recession that you saw great evidence of earlier, 70% of local communities' bonds passed this last November. Statewide bonds. We should have had a statewide school bond on the ballot this past November. And I asked Governor Schwarzenegger, and he and I got along great. We're on a first-name basis. He called me Jack, I called him Governor. And I was working out with weights trying to relate to the cat. But after the water bond failed, didn't make it on the ballot in August legislatively, the school bond would have passed. And that's not only making the proper investments, we can modernize our schools, do more career tech. It's great for the economy. It's those construction jobs. Because I don't want Bill's construction nephews to have to become RNs. And so you do the overlay, which Bill has done nicely. When you see construction and growth in California, that's when you have economic recovery. And so we have a real need for that type of growth. But we need to make the decision to invest in that most important capital, human capital, to again have our workforce become the magnet for these businesses to stay here. I've had a chance to meet with a lot of CEOs, even in the legislature, and not a one ever came to me and, Jack, tax rates, Jack, it's the environmental regulation, Jack, it's the infrastructure. It was always the workforce. Look at the number, when you tour the Silicon Valley and you talk to the folks at Google and Apple and HP, all of them, the number of engineers they have to recruit from overseas, from Asia. It's almost all of our, to get in here are taken up by the engineers. And we should be doing that here. That's the real need.
I have two questions. One, you were talking about the gap between the Hispanics moving up, and it was a very limited movement in that last year, and you said it needed to be fast-tracked, both with African American and Hispanic, and I wondered how you actually, steps needed to take to do that. And secondly, I know you've talked about K through 12 and the implementation of there, but what about at our UC level? What's happening there? There's talk about bringing in more out-of-state students. Right. How do you close the gap there in terms of making sure they get the education they need at those schools? I know that there have been cuts in classes and more difficulty in getting them. And how do you, some comments on that, please?
Governor's budget, and I was a UC regent for 8 years and CSU trustee, so I have some knowledge on higher ed as well. Dirty little secret, as the state cuts funding to CSU and UC, and the governor's proposed budget's $500 million less to each. And it's a much larger hit on CSU because they are almost exclusively dependent on state funding. UC only receives about 20% of its overall funding from the state because of research grants and other grants that they receive and support from the federal government. So a $500 million hit to the UC budget hurts, no question. But a $500 million hit to CSU really is a major league hit to CSU. So the dirty little secret is they're becoming more dependent on trying to get more dough. And how do you do that? Recruit out-of-state kids. So if you'll probably have a better shot at getting into UC, and this is a sad commentary, if you move to another state to get your kid to come into UC. Or you're going to pay out-of-state tuition to send your kid to Colorado or Arizona or Nevada. I mean, it's crazy. But that's the policy. Am I missing that, Mr. President?
Well, there are the independent options.
And you have great colleges like Westmont that can. But it's the policy is a killer. And then on the achievement gap, I actually put together a statewide P16 council. It was 50 people. It's chaired by Barry Munitz, former head of the CSU system. I know you know Dr. Munitz. And they did a remarkable job. They came back to me with 14 recommendations. We were able to fully implement 13. They're still working on the 14th. But it was a year's work. And it's on the webpage for the California Department of Education. But let me just give you the quick summary. Something I could do unilaterally, and I did, and I'm embarrassed to tell you I had never thought of it. Every school wants to be a California distinguished school. There are a lot here in Conejo Valley and Pleasant Valley, but the achievement gap at your school could widen, and you could still be a distinguished school. So I simply added additional criteria. You want to be a distinguished school, you have to narrow that achievement gap, or you need not apply. So that really forced the principals and the school board members to focus on narrowing the achievement gap. Our group came up with the acronym ACES, and ACES stands for access. And it really begins with preschool. So we carried a couple of bills that Governor Schwarzenegger signed to create more child care, preschool opportunities, or early learning opportunities for kids in areas that need them, some of our low socioeconomic areas. And that will help long term. The C's for culture and climate on ACES, so that we have this this culture of high expectations for all students. A lot of these kids, they're role models. Over 70% of our public school teachers are white women. And thank you and God bless them. But a lot of our kids need to have role models that look like them. And that's missing and absent in a lot of our schools. The E's for expectations. We need to have high expectations for our kids. And then the S is for strategies. All kids don't learn alike. And just like we don't talk alike, act alike, dress alike, nor do we learn alike. And so there's even differences between, challenges that English language learners have if you're in a rural area or you're in an urban area. Rural area, just getting to school is a real challenge. There was a school district in Kern County, when they take their break, their 2-3 month vacation, December and January. You know why? The parents are farm workers, and there aren't any jobs there in the winter, and so the jobs are in Mexico or in Imperial. So their summer vacation is in the winter. Otherwise, the school goes out of business. They don't, how they get funded, and there aren't any kids there, and then the kids come back, and so you have to be creative like that. And then if you're urban kids, maybe it's school safety. There was a kid, I sponsored an Achievement Gap Summit in Sacramento 4 years ago, and maybe last story, and then I'll stop. This principal was telling the story, urban principal, big high school, athletics, you always hear their name. And the principal saw his best player, best football player, ASB president, valedictorian for the graduating class, walking to school with his Leatherman's jacket inside out. So the principal called the kid in, and he said, "You're the best kid at the school, and you're disrespecting the school when you have your Leatherman's jacket inside out. What are you thinking?" And the kid said, "Well, Mr. Principal, our colors for our school happen to be gang colors. And if I walk through that neighborhood showing those colors, I don't get to school. And so the only way I can get to school safely through this one block is to turn." So those are, there's no one simple solution. It's part of it's cultural, the high expectations. Part of it is having the role models, the rigorous curriculum that's not always available. We've done studies. When you have schools in low socioeconomic neighborhoods, the teachers, you have a much higher percentage that don't have credentials, that are principals that maybe 2 or 3 a year, and that's where you don't have the type safety. I visited a school, LA, South Central, several years ago. I got there, and the first thing the principal said is, well, do you want to see where the shooting was this week? I didn't even know there was a shooting that week. And then he said, you know, I said, how many of your teachers are credentialed? And I'll always remember. He said he had 56 fully credentialed teachers, 36 that were partial credentials, and here's the shocking. He had 8, he couldn't hire 8 teachers because he couldn't find anybody that would teach the school. So I said, well, what do you do with these classes? He said, you're going to go visit one. And it was a science class that he tried to get a substitute every day for the entire year. We walked in this science class, and we were actually in an auditorium, a little bigger than this. There were 100 kids. It was 3 classes, 3 science classes. They were watching the Louisiana Purchase just to keep the kids occupied. That's contributing to the achievement gap that we have. Thank you very much for having me. Thanks for being here today. Is that all right? Thank you.
So, Jack, I have to tell you a story that underscores something you said. My daughter Beth is a middle school math teacher up in Rockland, which is up above Sacramento, and she's not happy with her pay, and she's not happy with the furlough days, and her school has seen layoffs and counselor reductions and increased class sizes. But I asked her the other day, Beth, what's the single biggest challenge you have getting your kids to learn the math? She said, without blinking, parents. And so if we can get the parents, as you said, to be part of the game here, that's really where the opportunity lies. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bill Watkins, for your optimistic forecast. Thank you, board members. Thank you, sponsors. Thank you all for coming. Good day.